All right. A very good morning to everyone, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, and passionate advocates for climate action. Welcome to day four of the Malaysian Support for COP30 event, a 10-day virtual journey held in conjunction with the UN Climate Change Conference in Belém, Brazil. Over the next 6 days, we will be exploring a variety of key climate themes that highlights how Malaysia is turning climate ambition into meaningful action. Additionally, you're welcome to visit the website to check out the daily themes. Today's theme, Synergy and Resilience, highlights how collaboration fuels lasting climate progress as Malaysia advances its energy transition and carbon market ambitions. Resilience comes from working together across borders, sectors, and communities to decarbonize industries, scale renewable partnerships, and build circular, nature positive systems. It's about turning shared goals into real action that strengthens both our economy and our planet. To kickstart our program, we begin with a conversation with Dr. Gary Theseira, Chair of the Council of Climate Governance Malaysia, who will be explaining the theme Synergy and Sustainability, Energy, Equity and Innovation, and explain how collaboration across sectors can drive faster, fairer, and more innovative, sustainable transitions, aligning with COP30's focus on clean energy and the circular economy. Please join me in warmly welcoming Dr. Gary to share his insights and reflections to kickstart day four of the session.
Thank you very much, Aaron. A very good morning, everyone. Here we are at day four of Climate Governance Malaysia's parallel coverage of the COP30 in Belém, Brazil. Just a bit of reflection on what seems to be going on at the COP. Normally by Thursday of the first week, the momentum in the various agenda items usually has picked up and things are moving fairly swiftly. As you get towards the end of the end of the first week, however, you begin to see the toll of long days and late nights beginning to appear on the faces of the negotiators. I do recall as we come towards the end of the first week, we begin thinking about things like the mid-term stocktake, which is a stocktake that the presidency normally would undertake towards the end of the official level to assess the level of progress within each of the agenda items. The stocktake sometimes is scheduled for the Friday of the first week, which means that it would actually be tomorrow for our negotiators in Belém. Occasionally, though, there's a desire to incorporate other material into the stocktake, and sometimes it gets pushed to Saturday. But in most cases, the presidency likes to be sure that stocktake happens on Friday to inform the work of the high level in the coming week. So in other words, if there are agenda items that are enjoying good progress, then there's a good chance that draft decisions might actually be moved forward for adoption in the closing plenaries, or for adoption in the daily plenaries, so that they don't need to be handled at the high level. On the other hand, if there are agenda items that are more contentious, not moving, stuck for some reason, a lot of bracketed text maybe, then these are the ones that will be configured and set up in a way that they can be moved forward to the second week, the high-level event, where ministers will actually then take over and make the decisions on these agenda items. Oftentimes, these agenda items are created with different textual options to facilitate the role of the ministers in making these decisions. So it's not uncommon to see a bit of fatigue in the negotiators as we come towards the end of the first week. There is, however, a lot of news coming out of Belém right now. We do see that there have been some reports filed. Just looking at some of the reports from the Third World Network, Radhika Chatterjee has been reporting on the continued divergence over the negotiations in the global stocktake. Now, as you know, the global stocktake negotiations have been underway since a fairly long time ago, but all of the work has actually been brought forward and was part of the agenda that was very, very swiftly adopted. But there are key divergences among parties, and particularly these discussions have been contentious in the areas relating to the scope of the work, the purpose of the UAE dialogue, and the objective of the UAE dialogue. And the idea really is that parties cannot agree on what kind of outcome should be adopted from the dialogue. It's important not only that the scope of the dialogue be understood, but that the form of the outcome it needs to be decided as well. Parties cannot decide whether it should be a substantive one with key messages, or whether the outcome of the dialogue should only be a procedural one. They also cannot agree on currently the duration that the dialogue will occur. So basically, an informal note was forwarded from the SB62 subsidiary body meeting. The informal note was fully bracketed, meaning that parties agreed that nothing in the informal note had been fully agreed yet. But there were two versions. The first version reflected the version of the text that the parties had discussed during the subsidiary body meetings, as well as previously in Baku, whereas the second version contained some last-minute additions to the text by the European Union. Developing countries groups, including the like-minded developing countries, LMTC, the Arab group, India, China, as well as the Philippines, expressed the need for respecting the original mandate of the UAE dialogue. And this original mandate stemmed from the finance section of the outcome of the first global stocktake, or GST1 as they are now calling it. Now, the EU, the United Kingdom, and groups like Switzerland, the Environmental Integrity Group, and Australia have proposed making the UAE dialogue a bridge between the GST1, the first global stocktake, and the GST2, the second global stocktake. This, in effect, could make the UAE dialogue essentially a mini global stocktake. So developing countries want to maintain this difference between the dialogue and what we are thinking about when we're talking about moving from GST1, the first global stocktake, to GS2, the second global stocktake. So Saudi Arabia, the like-minded developing groups, would not accept the use of the UAE dialogue as this bridge between the global stocktake 1 and the global stocktake 2 process, saying that it was completely prescriptive and a top-down imposition of the global stocktake on parties. Other developing countries did weigh in, pointing out, India, for example, that the UAE dialogue cannot get past, quote unquote, get past the architecture of the Paris Agreement, meaning that the Paris Agreement has already set bounds on the global stocktake, and that any dialogue on moving from global stocktake 1 to global stocktake 2 should not in any way violate those boundaries that were set in the Paris Agreement. China also opined that the mandate of the UAE dialogue was to conduct a dialogue and not a review. And I assume this refers to a review of global stocktake 1 with the idea of then using it as a bridge towards global stocktake 2. A number of other coalitions also weighed in on this very contentious negotiation. Groups like the Alliance of Small Island States, AOSIS, the Independent Alliance of Latin American States, ILAC, as well as the least developed countries, or LDCs, wanted the UAE dialogue to focus on the implementation of all the global stocktake outcomes. And this with a particular focus on the means of implementation, particularly the finance, the technology transfer, and capacity building. And they stressed the need of having a follow-up of the UAE dialogue in the form of a decision that will be taken forward to the plenaries and decided there. A second topic that was negotiated in somewhat great detail was the Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage. And this report was filed by Jinghan Hong, who is currently a volunteer with Third World Network. The loss and damage negotiations over the third review of the Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage. It's a very long thing, so they've contracted it to WIM. Everyone knows the WIM as the Mechanism for Loss and Damage. Saw some advances in the negotiations. This review has long been overdue, but it was an agenda item under the UNFCCC's subsidiary bodies. Unfortunately, in Baku, it was delayed, which resulted in a procedural conclusion. They used what is known as Rule 16 of the Draft Rules of Procedure to enable the negotiations to resume at the June session in Bonn this year. And these negotiations were captured in an informal note and brought forward then to these negotiations. Important to note here that the Group of 77 and China do have a consensus on this particular agenda item. And speaking for the G77 and China is the Philippines. Taking the floor, the Philippines proposed to use the informal note as the basis of the negotiations moving forward, and specifically wanted to use the text to find convergence and eventual consensus. It took note, however, that the informal note itself was not not fully agreed text by parties. Other coalitions that supported this included AOSIS, the Dominican Republic, speaking on their behalf, called for a strong outcome to the review of the Warsaw International Mechanism. Their view was that it was a priority, it was crucial to start sending a message that multilateralism is committed to having a response to loss and damage. It highlighted its priorities in addressing some of the most important gaps that remained, including the opportunity to increase the coordination and coherence between the bodies of loss and damage under the convention, as well as to simplify access for developing countries to the dire need for support. So it wasn't only the small island developing countries that spoke up for this. Bangladesh, for the least developed countries, highlighted that there are many good elements which add to the priorities of the least developed countries, particularly the knowledge product on non-economic loss and damage assessment, and the knowledge product on quantifying the needs and costs for loss and damage. The Loss and Damage Landscape Report, the voluntary guidelines for including loss and damage in nationally determined contributions, and elements to scale up financing needed to address loss and damage at the community level. So the least developed countries adding their voice to the small island developing states. In addition, another large coalition that supported this was the Africa Group. It expected the review to send a strong signal on enhancing coordination and complementarity within the Santiago framework, the Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage, as well as the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage, the so-called FLRD. Now, there were some voices mild dissent. The European Union agreed that it would be useful to look at the text as parties had already spent a fair bit of time discussing it. But the EU said that the focus should be on those who are particularly vulnerable and on the front lines of climate change, claiming that the adverse of climate change affects people and ecosystems and communities and countries in different ways due to intersecting vulnerabilities and diverse adaptive capacity. So the EU here trying to throw light on the fact that while there is consensus in the G77 and China, all developing countries, that this should move forward, the EU pointing out that a developing country is not a developing country, claiming that not all developing countries are equally exposed to climate impacts, and some have greater adaptive capacity than the rest. Is, I suppose, a mild concession to the divide and conquer. But in any case, the Philippines, for the Group of 77, and China eventually took the floor as the last speaker and concluded that there was overall good convergence across many issues among all the groups, and it wanted an outcome that would strengthen the coordination, the coherence, and the complementarity between the bodies addressing loss and damage, namely the Warsaw International Mechanism, the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage, and the Santiago Network. That's what we have in terms of some updates from the COP from day 4. Now, we were actually, according to the original program, supposed to have a guest who would discuss with us some of these issues associated with synergies in resilience. We've had a guest talk about adaptation, and we've had another expert discuss the issue of resilience. But when it comes to talking about synergies in resilience, here we come to an interesting point, namely that resilience is something that is multifaceted. And when we try to consider whether synergies should be relied on or not, one of the first things that we come to is whether any synergies actually exist. As we look around us at the various sectors of our domestic economy, local government, cities, towns, neighborhoods, and then move on up the scale to state economies, national economies, we find that the stakeholders all do have some comprehension of what resilience is, but in many cases they tend to work in isolation, and this has repeatedly arisen as a problem. So perhaps one of the first issues in dealing with trying to find synergies is to de-isolate all of the measures that all of the stakeholders are undertaking in an attempt to increase their resilience. Now, when we're looking for synergies, what we might find is that there are existing ways in which the measures for adaptation and resilience building can actually synergize. There may actually be programs, projects, regulations that can actually be leveraged to achieve this kind of synergy, and as we de-isolate things, find greater synergies. On the other hand, we might find ourselves in a situation where we find that when we examine these systems, we find actually that there is nothing to synergize, or very little to synergize, in which case we may actually need to develop or perhaps augment or somehow change some of the existing structures, whether they are adaptive structures, whether they are resilient structures, to enable these synergies to feed each other. And when we're thinking about energy, equality, and innovation, we find that these are really core elements to finding these synergies. And oftentimes, as I said, it's working in isolation that oftentimes is the difficulty in trying to identify synergies. Coincidentally, yesterday evening, Climate Governance Malaysia held an interchamber event. And in this interchamber event, we actually welcomed His Excellency the Ambassador to the EU, of the EU to Malaysia, His Excellency Ambassador Rafael there, and we had with him some guests, Stefano Clini, who's the Managing Director of Carlsberg Malaysia. We had Carl Godres, who's the CEO of Eurocham, the European Chamber of Commerce, and Dr. Shubharata of the British Malaysia Chamber of Commerce. And the topic that they were talking about, signaling, the importance of signaling climate ambition, I think is indirectly but obliquely linked to the topic that we're actually talking about today. If we're going to develop synergies, then we're going to have to de-isolate things. And one of the ways of de-isolating these various stakeholders is to actually work on how these stakeholders signal one another and exchange information. Because it's this exchange of information that actually informs and thereafter enables and empowers the process of synergistic work. And some very, very interesting and important points raised during this very interesting dialogue. By the way, it was moderated. The fireside chat with Ambassador Rafael was moderated by CGM's very own Joseph de Cruz, and he did so very, very eloquently and managed to pull out a bunch of important views. If we take a step back and look at how signaling ambition is impacting not only the COP, but the broader sustainability landscape, we need to go no further than President Trump himself, who, as was pointed out by Carl Godres yesterday, his signaling is simply climate change is a hoax, drill baby drill. All right. So it constitutes the part of the climate signaling that is extremely loud. It's out there. It's prominent. It's picked up by the media. It's splashed all over social media. It's commented on by various commentators, and it gets a lot of airtime. But I think, as Ambassador Rafael pointed out, it's not only all of the loud noises that we should be paying attention to. There are slightly softer noises that are talking about climate ambition, and indeed it goes all the way down to whispers that we don't always pick up. Sometimes those whispers are intentional. Oftentimes, though, those whispers are simply drowned out by current events. Frankly speaking, there's simply too much going on in the media sphere for some of these signals of climate ambition to reach your ears. All right. So even as we hear the loud and strident voices out there saying, things like climate change is a hoax, drill baby drill, the U.S. financial institutions, responding to antitrust and pulling out of the net zero initiatives, some of them have actually moved to other countries and join climate initiatives there. Net zero initiatives in Canada are still fairly strong in terms of membership. And we see that in other parts of the world, there has not been this pullback. So this is a signal of climate ambition. It's not as loud as the initial one, but it's a very important one, because we see that at least the intergovernmental bodies, the IFRS, how they've treated the task force for climate-related financial disclosures, the International Sustainability Standards Board coming out from the Glasgow COP, and the subsequent work that has led to the standards S1 and S2. Standards S1 is, of course, a sustainability standard, but IFRS standard S2 is 100% climate ambition reporting standard. And so these voices are a bit softer, but in the global financial sphere, I think they carry a lot of weight. There's been also a great deal of signaling coming out from the presidency of the COP, ahead of the COP. The Brazilian presidency conducting roadshows, going around, talking about how COP30 in Brazil as a landmark event, 33 years after the initial Rio summit, 30 years into the first UNFCCC COP, and 10 years following the milestone Paris Agreement, how they wanted this COP to be more of a COP that turns the corner, not so much a COP that is focused on negotiating, but a COP focused on implementing what has already been decided. We don't hear a lot of lamenting about who is not anymore a part of the process or who is not pulling their weight. Instead, we see a focus on inclusion, a focus on facilitation, empowerment, enablement, and moving forward. Right? The International Forest Forever Fund, all of these new initiatives are designed not to pander so much to getting people who are not interested in following, but to actually look at those who are already, as it were, in the choir and want to open their mouths and sing. If we think of this, this has been a bit of the softer signaling going on. Also, a bit of the signaling going on was what was perceived as a bit worrisome. The EU pullback, and this was one of the issues that very frankly was put to Ambassador there by Joseph de Cruz at yesterday's event. And I would say that the ambassador's response was measured but firm. Essentially, His Excellency said that, he likened the action in the EU to recalculating your route using Waze or using Google Maps. In other words, he said that the destination remained the same, meaning that the EU was committed to net zero, committed to decarbonization, but the route was changed, as you might have a change in route on your navigation software, to deal with perhaps difficulties that might actually impede your progress to the destination. Perhaps an accident or a police traffic stop that is causing a traffic jam, and now you recalculate and you find a route with higher probability of getting you to your destination in the quickest time. I thought this was very instructive, and I thought that it contextualized the ongoing tone of the EU very, very appropriately. So we looked at some of these national, international, and regional ideas in terms of how we've been signaling climate change ambition, and how this signaling then can actually bridge the gap and reduce these isolated actions, so that then we can then begin finding the synergies, developing the synergies where we need to, and implementing them. Right? But it doesn't stop there. So we had international, and we've got the EU regional. Malaysia just concluded its chairmanship of the ASEAN summit, and even within this summit, we saw a great deal of signaling. The theme of the summit, sustainability and inclusion, already incorporated elements of addressing collectively the impacts of climate change, as well as taking actions collaboratively to reduce continued greenhouse gas emissions and improve or speed up or accelerate our transition toward net zero. There were discussions on the ASEAN energy grid. There were discussions on the ASEAN water grid. There were discussions on development of key infrastructure required for the interchange of energy and even information. The potential for Southeast Asia being a bit of a data hub, hosting data centers was also discussed. So we see that there's a regional signaling as well, as we have passed now the chairmanship to the Philippines. If we come down at an even smaller scale and think, now we're moving from the very loud to the very soft, as we move from the global to the regional, moving to the national, we've come to what has been going on in Malaysia itself. And a lot of what has been going on in Malaysia obviously has been overshadowed by Malaysia's chairmanship of ASEAN, including the dignitaries who visited us, and wanted to address ASEAN member states, including President Trump himself. But so what's been going on in Malaysia might have actually been drowned to a whisper. But there are, of course, important signals going out. The Malaysian regulatory landscape has been extremely active, thanks to the regulators, the Central Bank, Securities Commission, Capital Markets Malaysia, and the industry regulator platform that they've established, the JC3. So we've had the various taxonomies come out from the regulators. So we have the climate change principles-based taxonomy designed to assess and evaluate loan applications for their climate friendliness, the climate positive, climate neutral, or climate negative, enabling banks to begin making informed decisions about what they would like to have on their portfolio and what perhaps they would less like to have on their portfolio, indicating areas where they might begin engaging with potential borrowers on how they might amend some of these loan applications to actually make them more climate neutral or even climate positive. Also, the responsible investment taxonomy, the SRI taxonomy, that has been put out by I believe, the Securities Commission, indicates what kinds of investments Malaysia is looking for and sends a signal that we want the kind of investment that will help us on our energy transition, that will help us on our net zero emissions transition as well. And interesting news is that the Malaysian investment taxonomy has actually been taken up and is being used as the prototype or the template for the ASEAN investment taxonomy. Once again, we are sending a signal from national level to the regional level, and we're hoping that this signal will move even further up. The central bank has been very, very busy as well. They have initiated climate risk management and scenario analysis, encouraging or requiring banks to actually begin looking at how sensitive their portfolios are to climate impacts. And in fact, under the climate risk stress test mechanism, they've actually obligated banks to run stress tests on their portfolios to ensure that their portfolios are resilient to climate impacts, and that if there's any risk in the borrowers on their portfolios, then they might consider beginning engaging with these borrowers to make sure that their loans will be repaid on time. One of the softest whispers that I discovered almost by accident was actually the Malaysian government's submission of its third nationally determined contribution, or NDC3. Yes, the Madani government did hold consultations prior to, during the development of the third nationally determined contribution, but the lack of coverage surrounding this submission was, I think, bordering on criminal, given how significant the changes in the nationally determined contribution are. Now, as many of you know, Malaysia's nationally determined contribution, at least the first version of it, was a contribution that was an emissions intensity of GDP reduction. So we had an unconditional 35% reduction in emissions intensity of GDP, with an additional 10% that was conditional on receiving means of implementation, particularly finance, technology transfer, and capacity building, per the rules and modalities in the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change and some of the principles in that convention. Now, second NDC was a big step up, essentially a removal of the conditional part of the contribution, making the entire 45% reduction in emissions intensity of GDP unconditional. So what was so significant about this third nationally determined contribution? Well, the most important change, I believe, is the change from a reduction of emissions intensity of GDP to an absolute reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. Now, a specific amount is not mentioned, but a percentage is mentioned. And specifically, we are aiming to reduce absolute greenhouse gas emissions by 20% unconditionally, and an additional 10% conditional on receiving the means of implementation, finance, technology, and transfer and capacity building. And we are committed to doing this within a very specific time frame. The other big issue that change that was this part of this NDC, but unfortunately was very unreported, was the fact that Malaysia, to achieve this absolute emissions reduction, will actually have to achieve a peak in national greenhouse gas emissions. Now, as I said, you can look up the NDC in the UNFCCC's website. It has been submitted, and you'll be able to see that there's a specific window, I think up to 2034, within which Malaysia has to achieve this peak. But at whatever point that peak is achieved, by the end of the window, that peak has to be reduced by 20% unconditionally. And of course, with the means of implementation per the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, we might be able then to achieve an additional 10% absolute emissions reduction. So I think that with all of these initiatives, whether they are by intergovernmental international bodies such as the IFRS, whether they are by regional groups like the EU, that all of these send a strong signal on climate ambition, sometimes louder because they have an international press coverage, but other times slightly softer. The EU, the Brazilian presidency's preparations for COP30, even softer sometimes how we should interpret the EU pullback and the key messages coming out from ASEAN and ASEAN member states and ASEAN plus countries on a large part on how to strengthen sustainability through improved collaboration and cooperation. And then somewhat drowned out by all the media noise internationally and regionally, given that Malaysia just hosted the ASEAN summit. What has actually been going on in the Malaysian domestic regulatory framework, and what has been going on in the ministry itself vis-a-vis our climate policy response in light of our reporting obligations under the UNFCCC, under the Paris Agreement. I believe that some of the softest voices are actually sending some of the strongest signals to the global community, to the important stakeholder groups, whether they are civil society, whether they are the general public, whether they are the young people, whether they are investors looking for green destinations, looking for climate-friendly destinations for their investments. It's important, I think, that when the voices are whispers, when the voices are soft, or when the voices of signals of climate ambition are drowned out by some of the more strident sounds and noise out there, that we actually pick up some of these messages, put them on our social media feeds, and spread the good word around that the world, not only Malaysia, but ASEAN and the world are moving on climate ambition, not always because it's the least painful thing to do, but oftentimes because it's the only thing to do. It's a necessary thing to do, and it's the only thing to do moving forward. And so I hope that our lack of a guest this morning to discuss the issue of synergies in resilience has not been dampened by the inability of the guest to show up. And by the way, it's technical issues associated with running an online webinar like this. We look forward to having the guest on as soon as possible. Other news coming out from the COP, we had a little bit of a disturbance yesterday at the COP, and fortunately it wasn't serious. This has been, of course, in spite of the fact that the COP presidency has been very open and very transparent about this COP being a COP that is going to be fully transparent and address some of the most sidelined voices to date. And among these voices are the voices of the indigenous populations of the world. In many countries, they have been sidelined and in many cases disenfranchised. Even as we continue to rely on some of the resources that might impact their livelihoods. So, for example, a country that wishes to harness hydroelectric power often finds itself in a situation where the areas that need to be inundated by hydroelectric dams actually intersect or coincide with areas that are populated by indigenous peoples. And so, it's a big thing to approach someone and say to them, this is your homeland, we know it is, but we are in desperate need of energy, clean energy, and we would really like to use this land to generate clean energy using hydroelectric power. But we at the same time understand that this land is your livelihood, and we would like to ensure that we want to minimize the impact of your livelihood on your livelihood. The other side of the coin is that if we are prevented from doing this, prevented from accessing these low carbon sources of energy, that we might in fact bring about a global change that will impact your livelihood as well. And so there's this balance of capacity building, awareness, and education that needs to take place. Information in the sense of the word to inform. So we need all of the stakeholders, including indigenous party stakeholders, to be informed about the stakes of inaction on climate change so that they can be partners and collaborators in helping us to address climate change. It's not just hydroelectric power. Many times reserves of key minerals that are needed to address electrification, to manufacture batteries and components. So we're talking about things like lithium, like cobalt, like nickel, are often also under lands that may be forested or may be designated as areas that are being used by indigenous populations. And once again, the principle of free, prior, and informed consent should be the principle that is first and foremost when it comes to human rights in addressing climate change. And so in spite of the best efforts of the Brazilian presidency to get this message out there that in establishing things like the IFFF, the International Forest Forever Fund, the role of indigenous populations would not be ignored, or the role would actually be highlighted and prioritized. In spite of all this, there was a disturbance at the COP where a group of indigenous people who marched to the COP venue tried to gain entrance to the venue by force, very, very unfortunately. On the other hand, it was fortunate that only two of the security personnel were mildly injured, and I think the confrontation was quite quickly and quite effectively diffused. So kudos to the Brazilian presidency for managing this. First of all, preempting some of these things with very good information and engagement prior, and then also in the very delicate handling of this to minimize any negative outcomes. Right. So I've got about 10 minutes before the top of the hour. I do see that there are no questions in the chat box. I do see that there are some things in the chat, but the things in the chat actually, well, okay, we have some feedback, and I'm very heartened to see this feedback. Interesting, I'm glad you mentioned indigenous communities and the intersection of infrastructural development encroaching their lands and livelihoods. So this is from Norazani. Norazani, thank you very much for your comment there. Yeah, I believe that this is not, of course, the first time that we've had special interest groups voicing their opinions during a COP. It happens every single COP. And most COPs actually create space, just so you know, if you haven't been to a COP. There's always space for civil society, for rights groups, and all kinds of special interest groups, groups interested in agriculture, groups interested in air travel, shipping, all of these groups of stakeholders to actually voice their views, and they even have a slot in the plenary where they are actually given time to make a statement. And so, when we're referring to groups like indigenous groups, we should also once again not forget that climate disproportionately impacts women and children as well. And among the vulnerable, women and children are disproportionately impacted by climate. We find many countries where, in situations where the menfolk have to find jobs in other parts of the country, or even in other parts of the world, that they leave the womenfolk behind with the children, and oftentimes these are some of the countries that are most profoundly and severely impacted by climate change, and continue and the outfall from this, or fallout from this, continues to be in the news, although it's sometimes buried. I think fairly recently we've had another wave of immigrants trying to leave some of these countries where climate impacts are most profound and severe, and trying to make their way to shores where they perceive they might be able to merely survive. And unfortunately, some of these boats are not surviving the journey, and that means that a fair number of people are not surviving the journey either. They are literally victims of climate change. And so I thank you for your input. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to take them, or any comments that you have. We at CGM are always glad to get your feedback. We continue to try to improve our activities and to find out where the pain points are in the corporate world, in addressing climate change. And for the next, I don't know how many days we have left. We're on day 4, so we should have 6 days left. For the remaining 6 days, we will continue, first of all, to bring you coverage of what happens at the COP in Belém in Brazil. As I indicated earlier, one of the big things coming up will be the stock take. That should normally be on a Friday. The stock take will once again tell us which agenda items are enjoying rapid progress. Hopefully there will be many, and which others may be deadlocked or otherwise might be so badly stuck, jammed that they might need to be set up for the ministers to decide on in the high-level segment next week. All right. So thank you for spending your morning with us, at least part of it. We hope to continue to deliver coverage of the COP, and also to have with us guests who will enlighten us on some of the thematic areas that the Malaysia Pavilion is featuring in Belém moving forward. And among these, we have a strong lineup. You can check the schedule on the CGM website and see whom we have as speakers coming up in the coming week. We have some strong voices that I believe you would be very interested in hearing from. In the last 3 minutes, perhaps I can turn it back to the Secretariat. I don't see any more messages or questions. So with that, I do need to give a bit of a shout out to the people who are working in the background, not actually slaving away, but they are up fairly early in the morning to bring this to you. So a shout out to the team, CGM team working there in the background. Of course, Arin, whose face you see, but there are a number of other faces you don't see. Jatian, Hakim, and a number of others. I apologize for not having your names handy here. Who work very hard to bring you this content. All right, so do tune in. We do have a session tomorrow morning. Yes, it will be Saturday for us, but it will be Friday for the COP, and so they will have something going on. Like I said, it should be interesting. The stock take, if there is one, and we're happy to bring that to you on Saturday morning. With that, back to you, Arin. The floor is yours.
All right. Heartfelt thank you to Dr. Gary for carrying that session. And now, finally, we would like to move on to the next section, which will be the C-Suite's highlight. So this will be moderated by Ms. Arina Kok of EY Asia Pacific Climate Change Advisory Leader and ASEAN Climate Change and Sustainability Services Co-Leader, together with our speaker, Mr. Florentin Odenwald, Managing Director for Malaysia, Singapore, and Brunei for Michelin. So Mr. Florentin is already here. So we would like to welcome him first because Miss Arina is facing some technical issues, but she will be joining in a bit. So before that, I'd like to just say that their section will go into detail about gaining insights on regulations that are shaping the tire industry and its potential impact to consumers. With increased circular economy design changing the business landscape, leaders will be sharing how they are embedding sustainability at the strategic level and innovating business models. The floor is yours, Mr. Florentin.
Thank you so much, Arin. Thank you for having me. So so Arina and we discussed basically 3 topics we wanted to discuss, which is reusing used tires, so basically second life, recycling of tires, and then all the regulations that are coming right now in Europe that will have a very big impact potentially on Malaysia. And now we're talking about a time horizon with the regulation come in 2027. So I will start with the regulation because then when Arina is coming, we can then maybe bridge the gap to the second life of tires and recycling of tires. So in Europe, Europe has always been famous for introducing regulations to push the industry forward, to educate end consumers on how good is the product for the environment, the sustainability. So they have a nice label where you can identify easily as an end consumer how good is your product in terms of energy efficiency and other criteria. And this has been there for tires for quite a while. It has been there for fridges, for freezers, for vacuum cleaners, almost every product. And now with the new regulation EU7, which will start in 2027, they first time include brake dust and tire wear particles, which puts a huge pressure on the industries, because first, the industry was not looking at it so clearly, whereas we as Michelin, we have been looking at it since decades, which helps us to be the leader in this field. And the interesting part is what they want to do. They want to take the whole market and say the bottom 1/3 should not be able to sell their products anymore regarding tires, because they're too bad for the environment, because they pollute too much the environment. And then potentially what could happen, and this is the interesting part for Malaysia, because if you cannot sell your product in Europe, you seek for another market. So the products will go to markets that are more easy to access than the European Union once this is in place. And Malaysia is one of them. So potentially what could happen is that all of the tires that could not be sold because of tire abrasion in Europe would enter the Malaysian market. And now probably a lot of people are asking, what is tire abrasion? Can you tell us? So tire abrasion is not to be mistaken with longevity and mileage of the tire. Tire abrasion is the amount of particles or the amount of material you're using to achieve the mileage. So let's say a tire, you can do 100,000 kilometers. You can use 2 kilograms materials or 1 kilogram material to achieve that. Because tires, when you drive a tire, you are reducing the amount of tread depth. Everybody knows this. You buy a tire, it's new, you have 8 millimeters tread depth. At the end, you have 1.62 millimeters when you buy new tires. And this material is going into the world. And we call this tire road wear particles. And these materials are going somewhere. So usually, some people are motorsport fans and they watch Formula One and they see all these rubber particles or tire road wear particles on the track. But when you are outside in a normal street, you don't see it. But those particles exist and they go somewhere. And now with this regulation, they're trying to make sure that only the best of the tires are being sold in the market to help the environment. And technically, it's impossible to have a tire without tire road wear particle. So it's very, very important to say that there will always be road wear particles, always. And there is a big independent study from the ADAC, which is an automobile club in Europe. It's a German automobile club. I think they have 22 million members. And they're specialized in testing. They test child seats, cars, all kinds of things related to the automotive. And they did a very, very extensive study on tire abrasion to see what brands would be impacted by this regulation and what would it mean for end consumers. Because there's always also to say, if you ban the bottom 1/3 of a market, it's usually the budget part of the market. And then end consumers would have to pay a lot more to access mobility. So they were looking into this. What would it mean? And we as Michelin, we have a 25% advantage compared to the rest. So a very significant advantage in tire abrasion. And they did this test. So it's a publicly available study. If you type in ADAC tire abrasion, you can see it. But the very important thing is that a big corporate will not stop to sell these products. They just seek another market. So let's imagine all of these tires, they come to Malaysia. And in Malaysia, which I find very unique, because I started in July, when I came to Malaysia, I was looking at the roads, and the roads are very sharp. You have a very specific material to make the roads, and the tire wear and the amount of particles the tire is losing is quite high in this market. So ultimately, Malaysia has now a time period of, let's say, 1 to 2 years to position itself, what kind of regulation they want to put in place in order to make sure that potentially Malaysia is not flooded with these tires that cannot be sold in Europe anymore. So this is the first part where we talk about sustainability, which is the tire road wear particles and the pollution linked to it. The other part, which is also important, which is the road safety and the braking distance linked to it, because every tire has a different braking distance, and all of a sudden, if you have a big, let's say, a big flooding into the market with very cheap budget tires, which are then recognized as not being able to sell in Europe, are coming to Malaysia, you add a factor of huge braking distance gaps into the traffic, and this is also something we need to pay attention on. That whatever we do, we have a safe traffic environment, and we are not increasing the braking distance between the cars, because everybody's participating in traffic, actively or passively. If you're in a Grab, if you're driving yourself, so we need to also take care about that. So there's a good opportunity for the Malaysian government to pick up this topic, to shift towards a more sustainable approach in terms of tire road wear particles. So the other topic we wanted to discuss was recycling of tires and second life tires. So because the interesting thing about tires is it's a very big, heavy product. Once it's end of life, what do you do with it? So luckily, almost 80% of the tires in the world are being recycled. And that is very important from multiple angles. The first one is, first, you're not burning tires to get rid of it. You're recycling it. So you're extracting resources again, which is very important for circular economy. Because you can imagine that running a worldwide supply chain to make sure you can produce tires is quite challenging. And if you have tire recycling already, a good amount of raw materials you can use again to produce new tires. Very challenging, because you need to think about how do you design the product at the beginning to make sure you can recycle it the best way and the most efficient way. And in tire recycling, so obviously, Michelin is not doing it alone. There's many others who are heavily invested in it. For example, Bridgestone, we have joined forces with them to push tire recycling forward, and we have a couple of worldwide partnerships with companies to help us to really progress in this. There's another regulation which is coming from Europe, because today you have two ways to recycle it. Or let's say two major ways to recycle a tire. First one is you shred it and you reuse the rubber crumbs, the crumb rubber, for something else, playgrounds, whatsoever. And the EU is banning this from 2031, if I'm not wrong, because there's a health concern, because there's polycyclic, aromatic hydrocarbons in it, which they want to avoid. So the way forward would be to work with pyrolysis to extract all the resins, all the materials. And I want to share something which was very interesting. So last year, in my previous role, I was contacted by a big car manufacturer, and they raised a very, very interesting question. And I think this is the question we have to start asking ourselves. They ask, if I buy tires from Michelin, and I put them on my cars, so it's my property, and then I'm leasing the car to someone else, they return the car and the tires are end of life. If I recycle these tires and I give you back the raw materials, do I get the discounts in first place when I buy the tires? So you see already the circular economy thinking is deeply rooted in every corporate to see how can we all reduce costs, achieve more with less materials, and make sure that the world is more sustainable. So the topic of tire recycling is a very, very, very important one. But of course, there's also a market when let's say you have a small accident and the car is not being able to repair and you have tires left. What do you do with it? And there's an interesting case in Malaysia where a lot of people are buying or selling and buying used tires, second life tires, so-called. And that is a very interesting practice because from our point of view, ideally, all tires should be used to the maximum. And Michelin, we design all our tires that the performance is made to last. You can really use all our tires to the absolutely maximum in tread depth, and it will be safe. That is our DNA. But let's imagine you still have 4 millimeters, 5 millimeters left. What do you do with this tire? Recycling would be a waste because you could still use it. Of course, you need to pay attention on, has it been stored properly, dismounted properly, and so on. But let's assume this has all been taken care of. So, but then you only have one tire. How do you make sure you find someone that exactly needs this tire, or let someone has a puncture, right? So, and there's people in Malaysia, they resell those tires. And I want to give an example, which I know from France. So we had a colleague in Michelin, and he started his own company in France. And he has a big corporate right now. And what they're doing is, and this is very interesting, they have lasers to analyze the tires to see what is the tread depth, what is the age of the tire, what is the tire model, what is the condition of the tire in total. And then they're matching two tires together so that you have at least one axle. Because then you only have the chance to put it on a car and somehow it will work. Obviously, it's always the best if you have 4 tires the same, right? But sometimes you have a one front axle, so you don't need to buy 4 new tires. You just replace the front axle. So he's creating a possibility for people to buy those tires. So he gives the tires a second life, which is a very interesting case. And in Malaysia, I'm in contact with Dr. Edwin Pang from Top Tire Reviews, and he's also looking into this. First, second life tires. How can we make a marketplace in Malaysia that the tires are safe to use? Because the first priority is always road safety, and then sustainability. But he's also looking into recycling of tires, and we're joining forces with him we try to establish a certified recycling process with the Malaysian government in order to have at the end, potentially circular economy, right? So these are the 3 pillars. First, the regulation coming where a lot of tires could end up in Malaysia. Then you would have the recycling of tires because that is a very important part of it, extracting the resources, circular economy, strengthen the supply chain and the sustainability at the same time. And then all of the things in between, which is the second life of the tires, to make sure that the tires are being used to the maximum. So these are the topics I wanted to share with everyone. So there's a question. I just discovered a question, Aaron.
Oh, yes.
So it's an anonymous attendee. I just read it out. Can the tire industry do more on tire recycling for locations that do not have it well regulated? Recently, an illegal tire factory caught on fire in Kuching, Malaysia, and the fire was burning for days. It was a big operation within the multi-story warehouse. The air pollution happened for 2 weeks. The local authorities can only do so much. So if there was a way to set up the circular economy faster for local tires recycling, don't think Malaysia should accept international tires for recycling. Okay, so there's a couple questions inside one question. So the first thing is illegal tire factories is always illegal. So first thing is, why do they exist? So there's something that the government needs to look into, how to regulate that. The bad thing about tires is once they're burning, they burn very long. So that's why the worst thing you can do is burn tires, because the amount of air pollution coming from it is just mind-blowing, and we need to avoid that. And I'm really sorry that it happened for 2 weeks. I saw it in the news, and I also saw the smoke, so this is really horrible. So the question on, there was a way to set up the circular economy faster for local tire recycling. So what we need to understand is there's different ways of tire recycling. you can recycle every tire. So we in Europe, we're launching also a program for tire recycling, specifically with some OEM customers. And the question was, do we only need to collect Michelin tires? And the answer is no. We can recycle all tires, no matter the brand. So, because in the question it says, do you think Malaysia should accept international tires for recycling? Or don't think, actually says. I think we should broaden and we should accept all tires for recycling, because a recycled tire is a good tire. Right, so we should not make a limit to that. We should be as open as possible, because then tire recycling becomes widely accepted. And what is probably for end consumers a very important question to ask: when you go and change your tires, you need to ask the person, "What do you do with my old tires? What do you do with it, mister?" And if end consumers are actively asking for, okay, please make sure the tires are getting recycled, then we will have also a lot of push and power in the industry to move forward on tire recycling. So that's it. So Aaron, I pass back to you.
Yes. Well, if there are no more questions, we will now, with that, we would like to conclude for today's program. So thank you again, Mr. Florentin, for answering the question and also giving insights onto this topic. And we also thank the audience for joining us on the fourth day of the Malaysian Support for the COP30 event, in spite of the circumstances. We hope you enjoyed the sessions. Before you leave, we would be grateful if you could complete a short post-session survey. A Zoom poll should pop up on your screen like how it did right now. So then if it doesn't appear, simply click the poll icon at the top left of your screen, and do stay tuned for upcoming sessions from November 15 to the 21st. And yes, tomorrow, as what Dr. Gary said earlier, there will be a session that starts on Saturday morning from 8 a.m. And we will continue exploring a diverse range of climate themes, which are all listed on the CGM website. Don't miss out on the theme for tomorrow, Saturday, which is day 5, Connecting the Green Markets, taking place tomorrow on Saturday at 8 a.m. The recording of today's session will be available soon, and if you have friends or colleagues who would like to join, registrations are still open. We look forward to seeing you again tomorrow. So thank you, everyone.